Children of I want to talk to your manager parents, what has been your most embarrassing experience? We got screwed once in a Taco Bell drive-thru, not the usual way, which sent my mom into a complete meltdown. The people running the place had, I kid you not, run out of lettuce. And I've never dealt with dumber people. Instead of just telling people they were out and letting go, they were being idiots and saying, there'll be a small delay. It was a super hot day, the AC was broken, we're exhausted, and all we really want is some water. But we're stuck in the drive-thru line waiting and waiting as they try to figure out how to make lettuce out of thin air. I don't know. You think there'd be another bag somewhere or something, but maybe that was too complicated for them. So, 20 minutes or so, sitting and cooking in the car, trapped between other cars in the drive-thru and unable to go forward or back or even sideways. And my mother is just cursing up a blue streak about the stupidity of the people involved, screaming her damn head off about, just freaking make some lettuce-free tacos, what do you use for brains? I remember how much of this very vividly as I was 12 or 13 at the time, and I was learning all sorts of new words and phrases. My little brother took notes. And that's when we see some Taco Bell teenage idiot employee boy make a break from the building and go sprinting across the parking lot over towards the grocery store across the way. They sent out a jerk to go buy some lettuce. The cursing rises a few notches. Nobody cares about the frickin' lettuce. Jesus frickin' Christ, just let us out of here, you little etc., etc., etc. Volume, a little variety, a bit more viciousness. My mom hits all the good V's. 45 minutes or so after we got into this, the car at the window, a couple ahead of us, which is probably the real villain of the story, why wouldn't they just freaking leave without lettuce? Like, WTH. Finally gets handed something and they don't leave immediately, they have to freaking talk for a while before they drive off. My mom is a volcano past its sell-by date and just frothing at the mouth by now, but eventually they pull off and leave and we can pull up to the window. What I've left out of the story is, well, my family, for a few good years, would participate in parades as clowns, handing out candy to the kids at the side of the road and dancing our way through the parade route to the rocking tune of Celebrate, Good Time Tonight, you know the melody, on repeat. And this day was one of those days. We were all in full costume. Makeup, super baggy rainbow pants, rainbow wig, big flower on the suspenders, big old ridiculous shoes, the whole deal. So the car finally pulls away ahead of us, and my mom, who for the last hour has been a spitting bulldog of vindictive rage and a constant criticizer of the drive-thru window people's ancestry and breeding, realizes she has to pull up and face them in full clown regalia to get our stupid tacos. I remember that moment when Mom realized it, the mix of anger, embarrassment, ridiculousness of it. And eventually the humor of the whole situation went through her and she started laughing so hard she was crying. And when the people behind us started honking for us to just go, they'd been waiting too, it just got funnier somehow. So now my mom is not just a crazy angry lady, she's a crazy angry clown lady, and more than that, she's a crazy clown lady who's been sweating and now crying too. So she's not even a crazy clown lady with good makeup anymore, she's just a wreck of a crazy clown lady, which makes her laugh even harder. My brother and I thought she was going to pass out. I mean, she couldn't breathe, and those outfits, the heat, hell, the whole reason we pulled into this place was we needed water. To give Mom credit, she didn't just squeal out there, flipping everyone the bird. She got herself together, pulled up to the window, looked up at the girl through the car window with her ruined clown makeup and big rainbow wig, and handed her the money very calmly, said thank you, and took the bag, and we drove off. I hope to hell they remember us. I know I'll never forget the look on the drive-thru girl's face as we drove up, and she started to try to apologize for the delay and just stopped, staring at us. Good day to you too. So this was a tough story to read only because I had to do so many damn retakes because I kept chuckling up and laughing my ass off imagining a whole family clown car stuck at a Taco Bell drive-thru, getting all sweaty and wet and hungry and thirsty and getting all mad, and then at the end of the day just having to put a big smile on their face. Good stuff. Best story ever so far. Let's hope the rest are just as good. This is story 2. Okay, so we are going to a theme park in the capital of the country. I must have been around 19, which makes my one sister 16 and the youngest around 9. My dad had been planning this for a year, and we were pretty psyched to go. After you go into this place, you see a huge lake, and on each side there are several shops. A restaurant there, a souvenir shop there, and also there is a Build-A-Bear shop. This shop is not a part of the park itself, but it does have an entrance from the park. Anyway, my dad didn't have custody of my sister at the time and only saw her very sporadically. This was by his own choice, since his anxiety meant he couldn't take care of her properly. She lived with a foster family, and this was one of the maybe 3 times a year he got to actually take her somewhere, so this trip was a big deal. He told her she could have one thing from the park, whatever she wanted, he would pay for it. And being a 9-year-old girl, she said she wanted a Build-A-Bear. My dad was unfamiliar with the concept of a Build-A-Bear, so he didn't know that the price of the bear isn't the total price. On top of it comes the clothes, the shoes, etc. So the shop person takes my sister through the whole thing, stuffing, putting the heart in, etc., and rings up the total. And my dad totally lost it. Like red in the head, screaming at this poor girl in the shop, lost it. And I felt so embarrassed. Firstly, this girl didn't make the prices. Secondly, this was the trip of the year. It was all 4 of us for the first time in forever. And thirdly, you just don't yell at people like that. I get that he was angry since he didn't know the process and felt cheated. And also he felt backed into a corner since he had promised my sister that she could have anything. But you don't do that, not ever. Luckily, the rest of the trip went by without a hitch, and my youngest sister doesn't remember this happening. She has 2 Build-A-Bears now, and she named each of them after one of her sisters. Story 3. Oh lordy, my mom is one of those, but she's not the type to push her way through lines and would only talk to a manager if really need be. But due to her stern and scary personality, she can't really draw attention to herself. One incident when I was around 8 or 9 was when we had to pay our immigration fees. This wasn't in the US, by the way, but in the Philippines. We aren't Filipino citizens, so we need to go both to the US Embassy, then the local immigration offices to pay our yearly dues while living there. The immigration processing line was long, like DMV long, and slow. Not to mention the office was infamous for having really lazy workers who only speed up the paperwork when there's a bribe. My mom, after 2 hours of waiting, had enough. She actually knew the vice chief at that time, went to school with him, and this is how the conversation goes. Mom, I want to speak to Chief Wiggum, Simpson name here. Officer scoffs at my mom. Sorry, but you can't just meet. Mom cuts her off and leans in and in a low drawl, tell Chief Wiggum Marge is here. He knows who I am. Looks at me, then the officer. He knows who we are. Officer had a look of panic, asked a co-worker to watch his booth, and left. About 10 minutes later, this jolly fellow, a bit of sweat on his brow, comes by, hugs my mom, and gives his officers a look. Mom took me by the hand, and we were ushered to his office. In the 15 minutes we were there, our papers were personally processed by him. In the next few years, we would just walk into his office to get this done and had this perk until he passed away. I learned later that day of my memory, Chief Wiggum was in a board meeting when he got called and abruptly left. Due to my mom's actions, it was assumed she was his mistress and me, the love child. He got quite the teasing of a lifetime because of that. As a note, my mom was the alumni secretary of her school, is also one of the most beautiful in her class, and is a baddie. I never knew Chief Wiggum has been sent to our house many times during reunions. Many of my mom's classmates moved to being big bosses in government offices, and she pulled this prank a few times, much to the amusement of her friends. They love her to bits. Nothing in that explanation convinced me that this dude's mom wasn't his mistress and he or she is not the love child of Marge and Chief Wiggum. Story 4. I think every memory I have of my mom is her yelling at a customer service employee either on the phone or in their face. I always felt bad for the employees. I remember at least one instance in which I felt really embarrassed. I did an online program that was geared towards new drivers. It was all about driving safety and took forever to do. At the end of the course, the young driver had the opportunity to get lower insurance rates, so I had to call a customer service representative and confirm personal information as well as answer some things from the course in order to get the rates. My mom kept insisting I put the phone on speaker. Every time I did, the rep would tell me to take it off of speaker. My mom would then try to follow me around the house trying to listen in, and the rep could hear her and said she needed to stop. My mom got mad at the rep, and I ended up not getting the lower rates on my insurance because the rep was fed up. Story 5. My dad is a pretty big hothead and thinks yelling loudly at customer service employees will solve things. So one time I brought my laptop into a Best Buy for a quick fix. They said I could come get it the next day after it was finished. We show up the next day and they give me a laptop that is 100% not mine. I just let them know politely that there's been a mistake and it's not my computer. They apologize and go looking for mine. 10 minutes later, they can't find it. Cue Rage Machine Father, you better find his laptop or there are going to be problems. No mention of what kind of problems, just one of those I'm screaming it sounds threatening sentences. They explain they will keep looking and call me when they have found it, but they will call me every day with an update. I'm totally fine with this being a relatively laid-back person. I was only worried I wouldn't have a laptop for my first week of college. Anyways, they did call every day, and every day my father would get on the phone and yell about how unbelievably stupid you'd have to be to lose a computer in the store. This happened for about 4 days. Every time they would get off the phone with my father, I would call them back myself to apologize for that and calmly say, "Don't worry about it, I'm sure it'll turn up soon." Guy on the phone was very gracious. I wasn't screaming at him and told me if they didn't find it by the end of day tomorrow, I could come in and pick a laptop and they would write it off to replace mine. Well, they never found my computer, but I did get a much nicer one for free, which I honestly think had I not called to apologize on my father's behalf every day, I wouldn't have been given the option to choose any laptop to replace it. Well, not that he should have been screaming at them, but I would have been pretty pissed too, considering how they lost a whole laptop. Like, seriously, how do you even do that, like his dad said, in a store? But anyway, if you two are super curious as to where his laptop went, then please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more crazy stories just like this one. Story 6. This is a weird story that had a huge impact on me and about a parent talking to the manager, but it is a little different. Growing up, my dad was sheriff of a small town. I must have been around 8 or 9. He was brought in after the previous sheriff was booted out for political reasons or stealing city funds. That was a really unpopular movie since he was super popular and spread his money all over town and let people get away with crimes they committed. That sheriff was out and my dad was brought in. Everybody hated him, in part because they loved the old sheriff, and also because my dad was an outsider even though he came from about 2 towns over. He wasn't of their world, so he could never be fit to see over the village. It didn't help that my dad was a raging jerk with a stick up his bum for the rules. Anyway, one day, my dad was dressed in his full uniform and took me alone to the local corner diner. You know, like one of those places straight out of Roadhouse. We sat down and ate the full dinner, and my dad lectured me something about respect and the rules are all we have. Then the waitress came in and dropped the check. My dad looked at it and it said the meal was free. My dad then excused himself and went up to the waitress. I kept to myself and doodled on the napkin, and the next time I looked up, my dad was full on screaming at the woman. He was straight up shaking. She tried to explain that free meals is how all cops are treated in this town, and my dad was furious that he would get special treatment, that police are put above the normal laws, that the police have rules they must follow, and not accepting kickbacks is one of those rules, and that it especially happened in front of his kid who he's trying to teach right. Everyone in the diner was quiet and just staring at him. It was a weird situation because it was a moment where my dad showed a lot of integrity, but also a story of a 6'7" man with a firearm on his belt screaming at a tiny little waitress. It stuck in my head as a clear picture of the contradictions that our parents are. Like, a lot of the good comes from them, but at the same time, a lot of the bad too. I know a lot of people would say how crappy he was, but he was a guy who roughed up my brother and I, had anger issues, was painfully insecure and closed off, but was also a noteworthy cop. He rose through the ranks and, as a white man, brought progressive racial policies to his department in the 1980s that, to this day, are still radical. He was an innovator as a police administrator. I'll put it like this: he did heartbreaking things to me, and yet I found room to forgive him. Through a long and painful process, I found room to forgive him as an adult. Not excuse his behavior, but peace in my heart towards my feelings towards him. Whatever opinion you have of him, keep in mind that from your computer, it is one that is really easy for you to have. And for me, it is and will always be a really difficult one for me to have. Story 7. My mom used to run restaurants, and my stepfather used to be a chef in high-end restaurants and is the kind of guy who expects to be treated better than he is currently being treated, regardless of whatever that treatment is. They are so not fun to go out to eat with. The most embarrassing experience is actually their most embarrassing experience, one where I embarrass them. My wife and I pride ourselves on being a relief table when we go out to eat. Both of us have been servers, and there's always the counterpoint to the difficult table. That's us. Barring horrible service or bad food, we are super easy customers, we tip well, and try to have a good time with our server. Furthermore, we just treat people nicely. So you can imagine our disdain when my parents act like they're frickin' royalty at a dinner service. My wife and I went out to dinner with them. They were being particularly tough. My mom was acting like she was Gordon Ramsay, analyzing the business, critiquing everything down to the amount of bubbles in her seltzer. Looks like it's time to change the CO2. My stepdad was getting more and more heated over stupid things like the amount of ice in his drink and how the waitress didn't top off his water that he was barely sipping on fast enough. It came to a head when my stepfather ordered a steak, medium well. It came back medium well, and for some reason he changed his mind that he wanted it medium rare while it was cooking. And they didn't read his mind, so he gave attitude, as did my mom. They jumped really quickly to demanding free stuff. Now, I'm an adult, and this may be the first time they realize this. I interrupted in front of the server and said something like, "Really? This is what you're doing? That's what you ordered." I turned to the server and said, "We don't need anything comped." I then pulled out my wallet and handed her my card and said, "This is for the bill. We'll happily wrap up with what we have here. I'm very sorry for their behavior. You're doing great." Then the line that stung them so deep, they still bring it up years later. "I was taught to treat people nicely, a lesson that seems to be forgotten. Thank you." They turned red, the server walked away, I looked down and cut my steak and didn't say a word. They were so flabbergasted that the meal was virtually silent except me asking my stepfather how his steak was a few minutes later. I signed the check, gave a big tip, and we walked out and said goodbyes. They've been nicer to servers each time that we've gone out since. Alright, good on this guy for actually standing up to his parents. That line, that final line, killer. I think they learned something, at least something they once knew, from him that day. Story 8. So my grandmother wasn't only a let me talk to your manager type, she was prejudiced, and advancing dementia completely turned off her filter for that. I've blocked out all the context behind it other than I took her to buy yarn and something went wrong. I think maybe they shorted her a couple of bucks or wouldn't honor a coupon or something. And whatever it was, it ended in a let me talk to your manager, followed by a tirade to the manager about how they shouldn't be hiring Mexicans. I just remember having to talk over her and say, "Oh my God, you can't talk to her like that. Nothing you just said is okay." Followed by me trying to push her wheelchair out of the store as fast as possible, with her digging her feet into the ground trying to get me to stop, so she could go back to trying to ruin someone's day and me wondering if I'd go to jail for elder mistreatment if her ankles snapped in the process, because nothing was going to stop me getting her out of that store. I got her into the car and then went back in and apologized till I was blue in the face. I wish I could say it was an isolated incident, but it definitely wasn't. If by any cosmic chance any sales clerks or phone reps that had to deal with my grandmother read this, I am so incredibly sorry. I apologize on behalf of my whole family, and I'd give you a hug if I could. As an interesting side effect of caring for her, I have a tendency to wander off and pretend to look at things when we get to the register if I'm with someone, and I'm not the one paying. I think she gave me an honest-to-God phobia. Anyway, she passed away 2 years ago, so it's thankfully something I won't have to deal with for a while. I'd never experienced someone digging their heels in before, and I was sort of panicking trying to get her out of the store before she tried anything else. I think under any kind of better circumstances, I would have worked it out. Bonus story. So this one thankfully happened at home, but is nevertheless, I guess, equal parts amusing and equally awful as the other story in hindsight. It was some kind of special occasion, probably one of our birthdays because we were all sitting at the kitchen table eating cake. The nightly routine was we all sat down to eat dinner and she'd put the TV on in the evening news, which we'd halfway listen to. They were talking about something political and said blah 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 blah, and the House Judicial Committee approved this. My grandmother caught that one line and said, "The Judicial Committee? Those damn Jews, what are they doing with all these committees?" I got caught somewhere between wanting to laugh at her misunderstanding and wanting to make some kind of noise of horror. And instead, I just inhaled sharply and aspirated a gigantic mouthful of chocolate cake and coughed so hard and so long that my mom wound up having to take me to urgent care because it set off my asthma. Good times, y'all. Good times. Alright, if you like these stories and hopefully you weren't too affected by that last one, grandmas, right? Here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love it. Catch you in that video, and thank you for hanging out with me on this one.